So many science fiction stories depict the end of the world due to our neglect of the planet and of ourselves. Science fiction and movies, writers, they show a world that is rugged, rigid, red, and barren. All the animals gone. Us, somewhere in a spaceship, dead, or finally found home on another planet. If humans are on Earth, it's because they're trying to salvage and restart the ecosystem. But what if things don't have to be like that? Today, I'm with Chieng Moua. He is an innovation executive, a technologist, a futurist, a sci-fi nerd, which is the main reason we're friends. He's a DJ, friend, and father, among many other things, including the chief revenue officer at a company named Glint. What's Glint? Well, Glint's delivering a new type of carbon emissions data so businesses, communities, and people at home can quickly access, verify, and even act on that data to not only save the planet, but ourselves. How? That's what we're learning today. I'm Catherine Dollar, and this is Not So Science Fiction. Chieng, I am so excited to have this nerd talk with you.
I'm excited to be here as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been waiting for this for a while because this is an important topic. And there's even a movie that came out with Leonardo DiCaprio called Don't Look Up. I don't know if you've seen the trailers for that. It's a dark parody about how most people don't want to have these conversations or they overlook it. And so they did this dark parody about how people react to this information when scientists or anyone tries to talk about it. But I know you're going to talk about that today, and how we can actually start having more productive conversations. So on that note, my first question for you is, yes, we've been talking about this for years. How do we decrease our footprint and the carbon emissions? But can you explain the plans and programs going on now, and what those conversations are like to try to reduce the footprint?
Absolutely. I think as the audience is listening to this, I think there's a lot of things that needs to be considered. There's definitely a political spectrum of this. There's definitely a technology issue, and then there's definitely the incentive of why people should change their behavior to facilitate managing their carbon emissions. The carbon emissions is a part of a program called ESG, which is the environmental social governance. And in a lot of cases, this is a standard of how companies should be moving towards. In some cases, it's actually very difficult when we start to look at the governance piece of this equation, because governance looks at policies, looks at process, looks at value systems in some cases. But what we're really focused here at Glint AI is on the environmental piece, where we can actually make positive contribution to the environment by looking at carbon emissions. And why is that important? Because you have to have the data first before you can make any decisions on how you need to change your business operations, on how you may need to change your supply chain or the behaviors of your employees, or even the behaviors of the consumers that are like you and me. And so data is probably the most fundamental piece of this carbon emissions equation. In some cases, people think that is a technology problem. And from my perspective, I think it's a bit of technology, a bit of value system, and a bit of the what's in it for me, as well as what is the ease of implementing a carbon emissions data system with all those other legacy technologies. And that's really the hard part, is getting all the new stuff to work with the old stuff. And definitely dive into a lot of this technology pieces and how it's being developed. But I think we're at a cusp when you start to look at global climate change, whether you believe it or not. Texas, I think for Christmas, was one of the hottest on Christmas Day. We were having some more frequent storms, severity of storms, and some people may call it sunspots. Others may call it change in the gravitational shift of the Earth, whatever. But the reality is that companies look at this as a risk to their business, because if there's a hurricane in Southeast Asia and I can't get my computer chips to put in my car, I can't sell those cars. So how do I understand how to minimize my contribution to climate change at the same time, manage my supply chain in meeting my customer demands? And so these are all very difficult questions, and the solution is not always that easy.
Well, and I think you touch on something really important is, one, like, how do you figure out what your footprint is? How do you ingest that into your other systems, get it all working into this seamless experience? I was just reading a article last night, I believe it was Pew
Mhm.
Research, saying how many people on both sides of the political spectrum are actually more for imposing taxes or tax credits for people that can prove they're lowering their carbon emissions. So yeah, either penalizing or giving tax credits back to those companies. And I think for this conversation, I know Glant focuses also on communities and home, but for the simplicity of this specific interview, let's kind of focus more on the companies. Though I don't want to hold you in at all because you're such a wealth of information, but can you touch on what programs and governments are out there trying to do to incentivize or even penalize some of these companies?
Absolutely. I think there's policymakers out there looking to incentivize and penalize folks for not leveraging their carbon emissions appropriately or maybe contributing too much to it. So there's a concept out there that's called greenwashing, meaning if I'm a company that's putting out a lot of emissions, CO2 emissions, then in some cases I might be able to buy those credits from a company that is net zero or minus emissions so that I can wash out some of those penalties that I would typically would have to pay. I think the reality is that when we start to look at the emissions side of things, everything that we do will ultimately emit some type of carbon emissions. But I think when we at Glint look at this problem, we are thinking about it from a infrastructure perspective. We're thinking about the quality of data. We're also thinking about how we can help companies finance by sharing those emissions data. There are corporate bonds, access to additional capitals, whether in the private equity space or the venture capital space, or even in the bond market, is that if you can prove that you're basically net zeroing your carbon emissions or on that journey, you are qualified to be able to get access to that alternative capital markets. But the hard part in this is, how do you capture all that data? Let's say you have 30,000 locations around the planet, different utility bills, different water, different gas, all these different things as we are related. We're talking specifically scope 2, which is the business consumption of resources, water, power, those type of things, gas. And so how do you collect all that information into one place that is both auditable, financially ready to be consumed? And then a part of this decision is educating the C-level folks on how to leverage this data. So if I need to go out and raise $10 million to build a new facility, what do I do? Do I go and take a debt equity loan against my accounts receivable? Do I, depending on my corporate credit, I may not qualify for that. Or maybe I don't want to use that because that's expensive financing dollars I need to leverage. Do I do a stock buyback and then leverage that, take a loan against that? So I have all these different questions that I want to be able to use the smartest play. And one of those things is leveraging your carbon emissions. Maybe that's the access to capital that you need that doesn't impact your financial books. So there's all these different things to consider when we start thinking about what's in it for the companies, what's in it for the team decision folks that has to support this, and then ultimately, how do consumers and investors see this transparency of these companies that's moving towards net zero emissions? And all this stuff is part of the Glint ecosystem and the problem we're trying to solve.
I think it's so interesting. And I know when we were talking about, so by the way, for those of friends of us joining us today, Chin and I love our nerd talks. And we talked about this a little bit before, and we were talking about this specific interview. I think you mentioned, and tell me if the number's wrong, $55 trillion globally available for companies that can show they've lowered their carbon emissions to a certain threshold. Is it net zero?
Yes, so there is a correlation between being able to be transparent, even but just by putting your carbon emissions data on your 10K public filing. What we're seeing is the correlation between 2 to 5% increase on the stock price, because there are investors out there that are concerned about climate change, that are concerned about companies that are being wasteful of their resources. So just by showing that and being able to have that number auditable gives that capability. What's interesting for 2022 What we're seeing is that I was reading off on the LinkedIn reporting of the 29 most innovative technology components, is that even though I may be reporting these carbon emissions, what am I doing about them now? So the bar is actually being set higher for 2022 and going forward, is that just because you're reporting it and you're not showing reductions, you might actually be penalized for it, not only by a carbon tax potentially, but also by the investor's perception and brand perception. And so we think here at Glint, we believe that in an opportunity for a company and organizations to be able to, quote unquote, harvest those carbon credits, to be able to function as both brand building, consumer awareness, as well as ensuring that the investor communities are getting the best results from their investment dollars and shareholders, and reflection of consumers that are buying their products. We all vote with our dollars, and that's how consumers will then be able to pick the best brand that are leveraging the smallest footprint to our planet.
And you bring up so many good points, and you've brought up before all these people. There's like three main incentives, I believe you said, that people have to make change.
Yeah.
Two of them being, I want to protect myself, my family, my communities, those around me. But a lot of times when we think of, quote, saving the planet, saving climate, change, all of that, it seems so far off in the future, and we don't get to see our own improvement on those areas, right? Our own footprint to that. But you also mentioned the third incentive, which is actually being immediately rewarded, incentivization, which comes to either dodging the penalty or getting that money, that investor interest, buyer interest. So I think altogether, we can see that it's just like a no-brainer that the companies want to do this. They want to know their carbon footprint. They want to know how to reduce it, how to act on this, create less risk for the company. But how do you do that? And you've talked about like just having that simple view of what's going on in your company and how to act on that. How do you actually get those numbers?
Absolutely. So the simplest form is we take the data off of the utility bill. Sounds simple, but there's all kinds of information on that utility bill. Today, if you talk about any ERP system, enterprise resource planning system or accounting system, all they're doing is they're just paying that invoice. You have a net number at the bottom. It's due in net 30 days for this specific location. And that's all the data that's been captured so far. So you pay your electric bill. So what? But the data that we need and the consumption and the meter readings and all these different things exists off of that piece of paper. And the reason why that piece of paper is also important is that it actually aligns it to some type of a financial contract. It also falls into their accounting systems that read as either expenditures for an expense line and goes through the whole GL entry and gets paid and things like that. So it gets reported on very well and is obviously being audited. The challenge is that many of the other solutions out there are IoT sensors at a building, or in some cases, to your point, it's more of a long-term reading of over years and decades to understand what the parallels of the emissions is to the local environment. And we don't have those type of luxuries and time anymore. I remember reading a statistic, planting a tree in the forest. For me, for my lifetime, or in 1 year of CO2 consumption output that I put out, it would take that tree almost 30 years to recycle the carbon dioxide that I breathe out in 1 year. So the net effect is that if we need positive change to our local environment, to our legacy, to our children, things like that, we need to immediately understand how this data is being used off of these utility bills, water bills, and then correlate that data in a manner that drives change, where we start to look at per site location, operations, and things like that.
So on that note, can you give an example of someone that is using Glint? They're using the automated, they're getting the numbers. And like you mentioned, they might have 30 sites, but we know so many companies, I mean, they might have hundreds or thousands. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the hardest part in all this is that, let's say you are a medium-sized company or city, local government, those type of things. And let's just say you have 30 locations, maybe 30 locations in Dallas or spread through all of the US. The challenge is that how do you correlate all those utility bills into one CO2 coefficient number? And the reason why that's important is that if you have a location in the Northeast, you may be using electricity from a coal burning power plant. Now, let's say you have a location in California, it may be wind generation. So depending on where your location is and the type of energy that's being used at that time and date, you might have a different CO2 number, emissions number per location. And then depending on how that location is using water, waste, power, electricity, gas, whatever, those things may change day to day, hour to hour, depending on what and how your business operation is. So when we start to think about, let's just talk about a restaurant. Most time when our restaurant's busy, typically during lunch and during dinner. But do you really need to have all your fryers running from 2 to 4? So in those type of situations, the data that we provide will help either the business understand how to streamline their business and lower their energy consumption. And in many cases, for example, PwC, one of the largest global consulting organizations, has made a commitment to hire 100,000 ESG consultants over the next 5 years. And what does that mean? That means that this is not just a one-time thing. This is about understanding how to re-engineer your business for sustainability and to manage a scarce resource, which is our resources that we have today. So these are all very relevant things when we start to think about not just transformation about how I can get things done faster, better, quicker, but also with the less impact on energy consumption and minimizing impact to our environment.
That's interesting. So you can get, like, going back to the 30 location example, you can get your single number to turn in, but it sounds like you can dive down and see which areas are causing the most energy, and if it's being energy efficient, like the fryer example, maybe between 2 and 4, I need to only have 2 running versus 4.
You're absolutely right. And so these, while Glint doesn't do the consulting per se, but we enable the consultants to be able to have data to back up their re-engineering processes. When that's probably the hardest thing when you engage the sustainability consultants, is that they don't have enough data to really prove out the process they want to implement. And this is where it gets really interesting, because now we have data, we can track historical trends, and then the companies themselves that are implementing these practices to manage energy and efficiency of their resources, they can then go back and say, hey, these specific programs is what contribute to my bottom line and gave me access to alternative capital markets. And this is where, if I'm the CFO or CEO and I'm not trying to make a decision of how, why, where, and why should I look at investing in a sustainability project, that's exactly the reason why. Brand awareness, shareholder value, as well as access to flexible capital that you didn't get access to before, that $55 trillion. So these are also very smart play. And yes, the net effect is to the planet, to ourselves, a positive experience. But really, it's about managing all those cost factors that's driving up your costs on a day-to-day basis. So those are the immediate benefits. We're not talking 30 years of recycling CO2 on a tree. We're talking about instant next quarter discussions.
It's like sustainability, not only of the planet, but like sustainability even internally into our own companies. I love it. I love that process.
Yeah,
but question,
so it's exciting. It's definitely exciting. And then where I believe that we're going with sustainability is that, especially when we start to talk about decentralized finance, blockchain technology, where you and your data that you own, your CO2 emissions of who you are, that you can monetize that. And that could be, to finance putting solar power on your house, possibly finance, get a better rate for a new Tesla or electric car of your choice. It enables people who didn't have access to credit before in that way to be able to contribute to their environments and better their lives. And that's really where I start to think about the utopian capabilities of where this goes, is that giving those opportunities to the folks who never had those opportunities before to make a positive contribution. And so that's where I think the exciting things are, and the possibilities and potential.
That's really awesome. And I think you touched on my next question a little bit, because you even touched more on the individual, but I was getting more of that, like not just the companies, but the individuals and communities. But why not just have those sustainability consultants and accountants look at the utility bills and put these numbers together? Why not use people? What is Glint bringing in different?
Absolutely. We get that question all the time, and it goes back to the cost and the expertise and the systems, and the scale of this is extremely difficult. Yes, you can always throw bodies at this problem and hire 10 consultants or 20 consultants, spend 6 months going through and reviewing all utilities, and spend $2, $3, $4, $5 million on a project like this, hoping that you can identify where all the opportunities are for a sustainability project, transformation project, right? Or you can leverage a system like Glint that's already been pre-built using the latest technology, cloud native stuff, and be able to enable analysis of these utility bills and reporting and third-party data pretty much instantly. And so this is where the cost benefit analysis for many CFOs, CEOs, the conversations I'm at the C-level is like, do you want to spend all this time, energy, and lose out on and that becomes your opportunity cost, and lose out on the transformation exercise that you're trying to get the immediate benefit today? Mm-hmm. So do you want the horse-drawn carriage, or do you want the electric car? I mean, that's as simple as I can make it. So, and so this is where I think it takes a lot of education into this market, and that's where we have been very focused in our abilities for the past few years, is educating on the markets, educating the business leaders of why this approach is uniquely different than the typical hiring, a project of 20, 30 different sustainability / accountants to come in and do an audit, versus letting a machine AI be able to do that for you.
And what I'm imagining, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but in my mind, I'm imagining the sustainability director at a company, or the COO or the CFO, or whoever this role has fallen on. If they pass all this stuff about, being penalized for carbon emissions, I don't know if they already have yet, or getting incentives to tax credits, but they get this letter in the mail or their email saying you have 2 weeks to do this, or you're going to owe this amount of money. If they're using Glint,
yep,
I'm assuming the one, that's not going to happen, or two, if it still happened, they're going to have the data to make the right decisions.
Absolutely. So you're touching upon probably the most immediate need right now with our customers. I will tell you, in the past, at year end, where we are today, 90% of our customers that came in the pipeline in the past 6 weeks, and potentially even forecasting into the next quarter, is the fastest growth is where they said oh my gosh, I have an ESG crisis. I need all this data right now, and I've got to be able to put in a program for next year. Otherwise, I'm going to get fired. Or show that my organization is improving their ESG scores and missions and things like that, and I need a plan. And so we're getting a lot of those questions, and obviously getting a lot of traction in that. It's from a sales opportunity. But the benefit to the customer is the fact that, yes, this data is cumbersome to go through. You need the level of expertise. You need pre-built models that, part of our AI engines, we've done that, and we've done that for the past decade. You need the access to various different APIs that feeds back into your legacy systems that you can do analytics or reporting on. And so all this stuff is readily available. And the benefits to many of our customers, like it's that relief, the sigh. During many of my sales calls with my customers, there is a sigh relief. And the benefit is really just risk reduction. And many of the customers of ours are looking at this as a risk reduction and an opportunity for inciting change and being that change agent inside the organization. So it's very exciting to be at the tip of the spear to invoke change.
I could definitely see that. I can't imagine getting a letter like that and suddenly having to make change, or my organization's, my job is done for, and then
I will say that many customers are actually being proactive in avoiding those letters, and so they're basically saying, "Hey, we think a letter might be coming. So what can we do right now to stave off some of those inquiries so that we can manage our operations, be able to put other things in play, whether that's a supply chain issue or whatever it is that we need to change our business practices, so we can buy us some time and get access to some capital to help make that change internally." And so you're absolutely right. I think many of our customers are coming at one or two ways. Oh my gosh, we got to make this change today. Oh, or hey, we're really thinking about making this a brand initiative, a customer awareness. How do we do this the right way? Who in the market can help us be part of that change agent? Since Glenn is the one that's providing a lot of that data, so it's a beautiful approach.
And I want to hear your opinion on this. You've touched on it some about, it's almost utopian in a sense. I think obviously all of us want to keep the planet becoming this red, barren replica of Mars, what Mars is today. But someone uses something like Glenn, I think you're the only one that's really doing this in your way. And we might touch on the technology if we have time, but in your own words, just uninhibited, what's the end result? If companies are really taking this approach, using this technology to get that clean insights and acting on it.
Yeah, I think
the planet or what?
Yeah, I don't want to be so dramatic in saying we're here to save the planet. I think the planet will be perfectly fine with us not being here. Ask the dinosaurs. I think the opportunity is really here to save ourselves. When we think about human behavior of consumption, and we think about how we've consumed raw materials out of the earth, how we basically transformed this planet to where we are today, technology is a very big enabler of that. Going from rocks to fire to petroleum to electricity to nuclear power, solar power now, and we're starting to recognize as a human species our contribution, how quickly we've changed this planet. And does that change? How is that change going to impact our future generation? I have two young kids, a 12-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I think about what life is going to be like 50 years from now for them. Not just 50 years from now, 3 years from now, when we're talking about the change of the climate that's being accelerated. I can understand why Elon Musk is looking to find a new home on Mars and other places. There was an interesting line in the Matrix, the first movie in the Matrix, talking about when Agent Smith was talking to Morpheus about the human species may be considered parasitic. So how do we change that parasitic nature of ourselves, where we just consume, and not think about how it's going to impact us in the future? So when we think about that, I want to avoid the dystopian environments where we're talking, there's no rain, and Hollywood does this very well, where everybody's living in these little shacks and things like that. But I'm also trying to avoid the whole Star Trek, even though I'm much of a Trekker, to avoid the whole Star Trek. Yeah, exactly. Utopia, where everybody's perfect. There's a middle line there somewhere, and that middle line is choice. And I think that we at Glint, our value system here is about giving companies, individuals the choice, the ability to make those changes in a way where it's cost effective, where it doesn't impact the environment, leveraging the data that already exists today, and doing that in a way where it's smart and thoughtful, and enabling customers and companies to understand what they're really doing. And so I think that's the first major step. And so understanding what that value system looks like in promoting a positive change agent. If we can just do that, I think we made a tremendous step in making sure that the next 3, 5, 30 years will be a positive impact for my kids. I think that's where when I say save ourselves, that's really important, because naturally, people are not taught to be thoughtful of what they consume. I mean, you look on any side of the road, there's probably garbage somewhere. And so these are kind of what I call teaching my toddler, who's 2 years old right now, not to have a temper tantrum when they don't get what they want. That's where we are in our human evolution cycle, as I think about it. And we got to get past the temper tantrum to really think about how we're contributing to the rest of the world and each other.
That's such a beautiful point, because you're right. Hollywood and even so many of our writers focus on the outward development, meaning save the planet, the exterior, the whole ecosystem, save ourselves, like our physical selves. But what you're touching on is just as important, if probably not even more important, is the internal, is the personal development, which is so beautiful, because I think you're really spot on. I mean, if we are these people that don't take care of the things we have, take them for granted to the expense of everything around us, including ourselves, maybe I'm being dramatic now, but are we really worth saving?
Well, and that's a hard question. Do we reboot in like the movie The Matrix and create a new one? So these are very, very insightful conversations when I get engaged with customers. It is why are you looking for change? Is it because of the carbon credits? Is it because the benefits of access to new capital markets? Is it changing the behavior patterns? Is it brand awareness? What is that change agent that you're looking to implement? And it's a whole slew of things. But at its core, it's a hard question to answer, because in some cases, people are afraid of change. Well, if we do this, what's the perception to our customers that have been along with this ride for the past 15 years? Do we let them go? That's not my decision to make. That's obviously theirs. So these are very difficult questions that companies as an entity have to redefine maybe their value systems.
Absolutely. But at least Glint is making that a little bit easier once they decide to take that step, regardless of their incentive and their purpose and their why for it. And it sounds like, and I want to give you time to let everyone know how to reach out to you if they have more questions. But I did want to touch on something you said earlier, is you mentioned it's cloud native. So you've talked about how it's including machine learning. I think blockchain is a part of the solution.
Yeah, that's part of that's on the roadmap. And so the most important thing that we're trying to do right now is get consistency of all the data from every different document and access points and things like that into a place to where it can be analyzed and created into a nice, pretty dashboard. So if you think about all the different types of energy consumptions and meters and things like that, it's not an easy task. And so just trying to collect it in one place is hard enough. Getting consistency of that data to understand correlation, that's a whole nother level, right? And once you get that, now it's the decisioning enabler piece. Okay, nice dashboards. How do I want to visualize that data? Who's going to interpret that data? Is it a sustainability consultant? Is it a CFO? Is it the operational folks on site? So you have to start thinking about how this data will be consumed. And then, when we start to talk about decentralized finance and the distributed ledger technology, that's actually the easy part. That is just basically connecting their data if they decide they want to sell it, trade it, monetize it, however they wanted to commercialize it. That's just connecting it to whatever the blockchain of choice that they're wanting to use today. So whether that's Ethereum, Cardano, Polkadot, whatever, that is on the roadmap, and we're excited that we're going to be part of this journey. But the point of this is that customers, individuals, consumers will have power and control of their emissions and where they want to send it and how they want to monetize it. I think that's extremely important when we start to think about what the future looks like. When I have the power to be able to contribute to a positive net effect and get rewarded instantly for that, it makes it a no-brainer, like you just said. So these are exciting times, and I cannot wait to be part of this journey with many of my customers. And if you're interested in hearing more, definitely reach out.
Yeah, what is the best way? So I know the website is Glint, that's GLYNT.ai. But is that where they should go, Chieng, or
That's
do you
where
want
they
to
should
direct them?
go.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely go there. Or you can reach out to me directly, CHIENG at GLYNT.ai. So I happy to have those conversations with anyone who's wanting to hear more. I will definitely do more of these podcasts and educating the markets. But I think we all have a choice now. I think the technology has finally at a place to where it's consistent, it's reliable, it can scale very quickly, and like you said, it's cloud native. It's pretty much plug and play. And we have many of our customers up and running within a week or two, if not sooner, depending on their requirements. And then it's just a matter of being able to implement the right programs at the right times based upon the right needs that they need to have identified.
That is so awesome. And see, Chieng, this is why I love our Nerd Talk so much. It's always not only about the technology, but those soulful questions on purpose and why and what we're going to do to create a better future. So I just love it so much. Well, Chieng, thank you so much. Friends, so glad you could join this Nerd Talk. Reach
Absolutely.
out to Chieng, visit the Glint website, mention Not So Science Fiction when you do reach out, and we'll see you next time.